This is the Portfolio Rubric Guidance for Standard PK RL KI D3. This standard is assessing the student's ability to orally identify characters, setting, and events from a familiar story using prompting and support. Please note this is a narrative text. It must be a text that is a narrative. When assessing this standard, the teacher is assessing the student's ability to identify the characters, settings, and an event from a narrative text. And this is a text the student is familiar with. A familiar text has been read aloud to the class multiple times. This is typically the narrative text that you find in your curriculum that you have read over many days. You have done shared reading, guided reading, you have made story charts, you have done activities. This is a very familiar narrative text. When assessing this standard, it's also important to note what is an event. An event is anything that has happened in the text. So in this story, anything that happens is an event. When assessing the kindergarten standard, you are going to be assessing standard KRL KID 3. You will only move to level 6 and 7 and assess the kindergarten standard once your pre-K students have mastered the pre-K standard. In kindergarten, you will also assess the major events, not just an event. So major events are important events that happened at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end of the story. You are also assessing in kindergarten the characters and the settings. For all three levels, the teacher assesses by asking questions. These questions should be to determine if the student can tell the character, setting, and the events after they have read and listened to the familiar narrative text. The question should not be, tell me what this text is about, or tell me about the story. That does not assess the character, setting, and the events. So be sure to ask questions that lead students to answer those questions. This is an oral assessment. This standard is assessing the student's ability to orally answer these comprehension questions. If the characters have a name, the student must know the character's name to be able to identify that character correctly. Next in the rubric, you will see in a suggested task. So these are questions you might ask. You can also ask your own questions, but each question that you ask should, again, lead students to answer, who are the characters in the story? Or you may say, who is the story about? You don't have to use the word character. You don't have to use the word setting, but you need to ask who the story is about. You could say, who are the characters? Or are there any more characters? Where did this story happen? And then what happened in the text to find out if they know the events. It's important to note that both kindergarten and pre-K assess this standard with prompting and support. So what is prompting and support? When asking these questions, students can look at the book. Students can look at the story webs you have made in class, keeping in mind that this is a familiar text. So you have done work with this text for many days. So any of the things that you have used in class, they can be used as a prompt or as a support for students to look at and refer to in order to answer these questions. Because this is an oral assessment, the required method of evidence is a video recording. A video recording must be included. This is not a writing text assessment for pre-K or at level 6 and 7 for kindergarten. This is an oral assessment. A video recording of the students must be included as evidence. It's also important to note for this standard, an answer key must accompany the student's video. You can include your answer key in the context narrative, or you can upload it as additional evidence with the student's samples. In your answer key, you must include the title of the book, the author of the book, and an answer key to the answers to the questions that you have asked your students. Again, this is a verbal assessment, not a writing assessment. This should also be assessed to students individually. Once you have assessed all of your students, it is then time to look at the rubric. A rubric is used to score student work. It is not used to assess student work. So looking at your rubric, you would look at your student work and analyze it. When you analyze your student work, if the student is not able to identify any aspect of the text, they cannot answer any of the questions, or they're completely talking off topic, that would score a level 0. When analyzing your student work, if the student is able to recall something that happened in the text, but they do not identify any characters or settings, or the setting or any events, but they can tell you something about the book, then that is a level 1. If the student is able to tell you a character, a setting, or an event that happened in the text, one of those things, that is a score of a level 2. If the student is able to tell you the character, setting, event, they could tell you 2 of those 3 things, then that is a level 3. So this means if they can tell you the character and the setting, or maybe the character and an event, maybe the setting and an event, it does not mean 2 settings or 2 events. If they can tell you 2 of those different aspects, character, setting, or an event, that is the score of a level 3. If the students are able to tell you a character, the setting, and at least one thing that happened in the text, one event, that is a score of a level 4. So they are actually identifying all 3 things: a character, the setting, and at least one event. At level 5, the student is able to identify the character, the setting, and more than one event that happened in the text. At level 6 and 7, you are moving into the kindergarten standard. So in kindergarten, students are not only identifying the character and the setting, they are also identifying the major event. And that is something that happened at the beginning, in the middle, or at the event, or at the end. Also, at level 6, the student is able to tell you more than one character in the text. At level 7, the student is able to identify more than one character, the setting, and in a major event for at least 2 elements of the story. So this means they can tell you something that happened at the beginning and in the middle, or they can tell you something that happened in the middle or at the end, or at the beginning and the end. They just can't tell you all 3, beginning, middle, and the end. So if students are able to tell you more than one character, the setting, and at least 2 elements, beginning, middle, or the end, that is a score of a level 7.